Hey there, class. Welcome back. This chapter is on personality. We're going to be discovering three major concepts: Freud, humanism, and trait theory. So let's go ahead and jump in and get some definitions out of the way. So this sweet little baby has what's called temperament, a basic temperament, which is like baby personality. She has some distinct patterns of emotional reactions and behaviors that are observed very early in life. By the time she's just a few months old, we can probably tell if she's going to be introverted or extroverted. These will remain fairly stable across the lifespan, but of course they're molded by the environment. I was a deeply introverted child, but I have become much more extroverted as I've gotten older. Do you want to know how you can tell with the baby if they're introverted or extroverted? If the baby is sitting in their carrier or lying on the floor and you hold up some kind of a dangling toy that's visually and auditorially stimulating, some babies will be really excited by this at first, and then after a few minutes they'll get kind of overwhelmed and they'll start to fuss and cry and look away. And then other babies will react to it with interest, but relatively calm, and they don't get tired of it. Can you tell which one is introverted and which one is extroverted? It's the baby that's super engaged with it and then is overwhelmed that will probably be introverted. The baby that responds to it with interest and remains pretty stable probably is extroverted. Okay, so personality, though, is what adults and older people have. This is our full, unique, core set of characteristics that influence the way we think and act and feel. And these are relatively consistent and enduring throughout the lifespan. All right, so let's jump into Freud. So first of all, do we all speak Freud here? Have you heard of these terms: penis envy, a Freudian slip, the unconscious, repression, Oedipus complex, castration anxiety, sublimation, transference, id, superego, ego, phallic symbols? You have to have heard of at least some of those. What is a Freudian slip anyway? Well, it is not a silky undergarment that goes under your dress or skirt so that people don't see your underwear. A Freudian slip is where you've said something verbally that indicates to others some desire that you have inside of you, and for Freud it's generally about sex and aggression. So if I say something like, well, we won't use me. If let's say a man says that is wanting to say, oh, I'm going to go out to dinner with my wife this weekend. I'm going to go out to dinner with Sally this weekend. But instead he says, I'm going to go out to dinner with Annabelle this weekend. But Annabelle is his coworker. We might say that that's a Freudian slip that indicates that he's having romantic feelings toward his coworker. So that's a Freudian slip. So this is Freud himself, Sigmund Freud, and oh, I thought I had more on there. So Freud is an interesting figure. He was working in Vienna. He worked under Breuer, as I recall, and Breuer had trained him in hypnosis, and so he began to use hypnosis to treat women with what was called hysteria. And he was finding that under hypnosis, he could get some pretty significant results. Freud did do a lot of cocaine. That is true. At that time, it was becoming commonly known as an analgesic that would prevent pain. And so people were experimenting with that as he did as well. Okay, so let's get to some of the details of his theory. So the iceberg is often used as a way to illustrate his ideas. So notice that you've got three levels of consciousness. So just the tip of the iceberg is above the waterline. This is what we're conscious of, anything that we're aware of at the moment. Below that, we have the preconscious. This is stuff that can be easily brought up to awareness. What you ate for breakfast yesterday, how mad your mom used to make you when she would criticize your math skills. But deep, deep underwater is the unconscious. This is activity that is well below the level of awareness and maybe not even necessarily accessible through conscious effort. Notice there are three other components here. There's the ego, the superego, and the id. Let's start with the id. The id is defined as psychic energy. It is impulsive and illogical. When we are born, we are all id. The id wants what it wants, and it wants it right now. And it generally wants pleasure, and it wants to avoid pain. So when the baby bites the nipple, it's doing that not to hurt somebody else, but because it wants something. When the baby cries to be held, that's because it wants something. The superego and the id is deep, deep in the unconscious. And Freud would really say that the id is governed by two primary desires, sex and aggression, pleasure and the avoidance of pain. The superego, you might call this your conscience. These are the internalized rules of society, parents, teachers. This is what you should do. This is what you want to do. Notice that's really big. This is what you should do. The id is deep in the unconscious and you can't access it very easily. The superego is easily brought up. It's in the preconscious. It's always there, and you can bring it up to the conscious level. The ego is also in the preconscious. The ego is monitoring the demands of superego and id. The ego is you trying to figure out how to get what the id wants while also maintaining what the superego demands of you. So you might want to sleep with your coworker, but you know you shouldn't because the superego tells you you shouldn't. And so instead, the ego just flirts with the coworker. And the ego can be brought up into conscious awareness, as can superego. All right, let's walk through it a little bit more. So the conscious is the mental activities in your current awareness. The preconscious is mental activities outside of current awareness, but can be easily brought to attention. And then the unconscious is level of consciousness outside of awareness, which is difficult to access without great effort or therapy. The id operates on the pleasure principle. It is the most primitive structure of the mind. It is unconscious. It is irrational, impulsive. It wants instant gratification. It seeks pleasure and it avoids pain. So it wants to be held. It wants to be nursed. It wants to sleep with a coworker. It wants to sit on the couch and watch Netflix and eat chips. It doesn't want to exercise or get up in the morning at 5 a.m. to go to work. It doesn't want to clean its room. Okay. Let's go to the superego next, then we'll go back to ego. Superego is the guide for following the rules of society, parents, and authority figures. The superego says, this is good and this is bad, and don't do the bad and do the good. It's the rules. It's your conscience. It's telling you what's right and wrong. It's your moral compass. And there's you in the middle, ego. Ego operates on what he calls the reality principle, as opposed to the pleasure principle of the id. Awareness of consequences. The ego can predict what will happen if we act on an urge. It's aware of superego saying this is good and this is bad. It knows what will happen if it does the bad thing. And it's aware of the id's desires. It tries to manipulate situations. It plans for the future. It solves problems. It makes decisions. It delays gratification. It's the mediator between id and superego. So id might want to punch dad or hit dad because dad said you can't go out on Saturday night. But superego says absolutely not. You cannot hit your father. And so ego says go back to your room and punch your pillow. Or ego says, go back to the living room and hit your sister. Or ego says, sneak out of the house and he won't know. Stuff like that. Okay. So, just to revisit the idea, the conscious level, the ego is operating in the preconscious and the conscious. The superego, which is your it's your conscience is preconscious and can go into consciousness. And then deep down inside, most of your mind is occupied by the id, that psychic energy that says, I want the things that I want. And most of that is unconscious. So ego is saying, it is saying, I want it right now. Superego is saying, you can't have it, that's not right. And so ego manipulates the situation. Remember, the ego is manipulating, it's planning, it's making decisions, it's trying to mediate. So ego is saying, I just need to do a little bit of planning to get it. I'm just going to wait until he's in bed, and then I'm going to sneak out of the house, and then I'll come back before he's even awake. Or it says, you know, it wouldn't be that bad. It's just sex. If I have sex with my coworker, I just need to make sure that my wife doesn't find out. I'll just pay with cash. Stuff like that. Okay. So that is an introduction to Freud, and I will see you in the next video for a discussion of defense mechanisms.